The dinner was supposed to be peaceful, a simple Saturday evening with roast chicken, a bottle of wine, and polite conversation. But if there was one thing Mark had learned in 3 years of marriage, it was that dinners with his mother-in-law, Margaret Whitmore, were never simple. She sat at the head of the table like a queen at court. Every gesture deliberate, every word laced with judgment. The silverware gleamed under the chandelier, and the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and expensive perfume. Mark caught Ella's nervous glance across the table and knew she was bracing herself too. "So," Margaret said finally, dabbing her mouth with a linen napkin, "I hear the housing market's gone up again." Mark nodded, cautiously. "Yes, we've been fortunate. The house's value has appreciated quite a bit since we bought it." Her smile was thin, precise. "Your house, you mean?" Mark frowned. "Our house. Ella and I both—" "Oh, don't be naive," she interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp. "Ella's name isn't even on the deed, is it?" Ella's fork froze mid-air. "Mom, please." But Margaret wasn't done. "You know, Mark, in my day, a responsible husband made sure his wife was secure. You've got her living here, relying on your income, with no legal protection. What happens if something happens to you?" "I have a will," Mark replied evenly. "And insurance. Ella's well taken care of." Margaret let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Paper promises. I'm talking about real security. A house in her name. Or, better yet," she paused, setting down her wineglass, eyes narrowing, "in mine. That way I can ensure this family's legacy stays protected." The room fell silent. The faint ticking of the dining room clock filled the gap. Mark blinked, certain he'd misheard. "In yours?" He repeated slowly. Margaret nodded as though she were suggesting something perfectly reasonable. "Yes, you can transfer the deed to me. It's just paperwork. I'll hold it in trust for Ella and the children when you have them, of course." Ella gasped. "Mom, what?" Margaret said, feigning innocence. "I'm only thinking of the future. You've been married 3 years and still no grandchildren. Perhaps if I knew Ella's future was secure, I'd feel more comfortable." Encouraging her, Mark stared at her, struggling to process what she'd just said. "You're telling me that unless I give you my house, you won't allow your daughter to have children?" Margaret tilted her head slightly, as if considering how her words might sound. Then she smiled, that same cold, practiced smile. "Let's just say I'd discourage it, strongly." Ella buried her face in her hands. "Mom, that's insane. You can't just—" "I can and I will," Margaret cut her off. "I raised you better than to depend on a man who keeps everything in his own name." The words hung in the air like smoke. Mark felt something inside him harden an instinctive awareness that this wasn't just interference. This was control. He wanted to argue, to shout, but he caught Ella's trembling lip and held back. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I think that's enough for tonight." She ignored him, taking another sip of wine. "Think about what I said. I won't have my daughter living in uncertainty. Either the house goes in my name, or there will be no talk of grandchildren. I won't bless a future built on sand." Then she stood, smoothed her skirt, and walked out of the dining room as, though she'd merely commented on the weather, the front door clicked shut behind her. For a long time, neither Mark nor Ella spoke. The roast chicken sat untouched, steam rising in thin, ghostly wisps. Finally, Mark leaned back in his chair and muttered, "Your mother just tried to buy her way into our marriage." Ella whispered, "Oh, blackmail her way in." And somewhere in the silence that followed, something in Mark's chest shifted from confusion to resolve. He didn't know how yet, but one thing became certain. Margaret Whitmore had declared war. And this was only the first move. The next morning, Mark woke up to silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, unspoken kind that fills the space between two people who don't know what to say. The sunlight spilled weakly through the curtains, painting golden lines across the floorboards, and for a moment he almost forgot the previous night. Ella stood by the kitchen counter, her hair unbrushed, staring blankly at her phone. She was reading a message, her lips pressed in a tight line. Mark poured himself coffee, waiting. Is it her? He finally asked. Ella didn't look up. She's... sorry, sort of. She says she didn't mean it the way it sounded. Mark gave a humorless laugh. How exactly did she mean it? Give me your house or no grandchildren doesn't leave much room for interpretation. Ella winced. Mark, please. She's just... old-fashioned. Controlling, yes, but she thinks she's protecting me. Protecting you from what? A stable husband and a paid-off mortgage? Her eyes flashed. Don't twist it like that. She just wants me to feel safe. You know how she is? She lost everything when Dad died? The house, the savings? She's paranoid about security. Mark took a slow sip of coffee, biting back the first dozen things that came to mind. He wanted to yell, to tell Ella that her mother's paranoia didn't give her the right to treat them like chess pieces. But he saw the conflict in Ella's face, the tug of loyalty between a husband and a mother, and he stayed quiet. I'll talk to her, Ella said softly, scrolling through her phone again. Maybe if I explain... Ella, Mark interrupted, setting his mug down with a sharp click. This isn't something to explain. Your mother issued an ultimatum. You can't just talk logic into that kind of person. She crossed her arms defensively. She's my mother, Mark. I can't just cut her off. I'm not asking you to, he said, voice low but firm. But I'm asking you to stop letting her treat our marriage like a negotiation. That ended the conversation for the moment. But the silence that followed was heavier than before. Over the next week, Margaret's presence grew like an invisible storm cloud over their home. She called daily, sometimes twice a day. Sometimes she'd check in on Ella, pretending to ask about dinner plans or work. But somehow the conversation always found its way back to the house. Mark overheard snatches of her manipulative lines as he passed by the living room. You deserve to feel secure, sweetheart. If Mark really loved you, he'd show it in something tangible. Do you want your children growing up uncertain of where they belong? Each word was a seed, and Mark could feel them taking root in Ella's doubts. One evening, he came home from work to find Margaret's car parked in their driveway again. She was inside, sitting at their dining table with a stack of papers spread out neatly in front of her. What is this? Mark asked, keeping his tone neutral. Margaret smiled pleasantly. Just something for you to look over. A simple property transfer draft. I even found a notary who can come by tomorrow. Ella sat beside her, silent. Her eyes read. Mark glanced at the papers, an official-looking document transferring full ownership of the house to Margaret Whitmore. His jaw tightened. You came into my home to hand me this? Margaret didn't flinch. I came to give my daughter peace of mind. He folded the papers carefully and set them aside. You can take these with you when you leave. Mark, Ella said quietly, please don't make this harder. I'm not the one making it hard, he said, his voice sharper than he intended. I'm the one trying to keep us from being blackmailed. Margaret stood, collecting her purse with deliberate calm. Think it over. I'm patient. For now. But my daughter won't wait forever to start a family. She left without another word, her heels clicking like the sound of a ticking clock. Ella burst into tears the moment the door shut. She's impossible, Mark. I don't know what to do. Mark pulled her into his arms, his expression darkening. You don't have to do anything, he murmured. But I will. And as he held her close, a quiet determination began to form, a resolve colder than anger, sharper than fear. If Margaret wanted a war over control, he was done playing defense. For 2 blessed days, Margaret stayed away. The phone didn't ring, the doorbell didn't chime, and Mark dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd come to her senses. But peace, as he would soon learn, was never Margaret Whitmore's natural state. On the 3rd evening, Ella received a text that made her visibly pale. Mark, noticing, asked, Is it her again? Ella hesitated. She says she's worried. She wants to meet for lunch tomorrow. Just the 2 of us. Mark sighed. Do you want me to come? No, Ella said quickly. If you're there, she just get defensive. Maybe if I go alone, I can make her understand how much this is hurting us. He didn't argue, but the pit in his stomach deepened. Margaret didn't talk, she strategized. And she'd been manipulating people far longer than Ella had been alive. The next afternoon, Ella met her mother at the Gables, a high-end restaurant Margaret loved for its marble floors and discreet waitstaff. Margaret arrived 15 minutes late, perfectly dressed, smiling as if nothing had happened. "Darling," she exclaimed, kissing Ella's cheek. "You look thin. Is Mark not feeding you?" Ella sighed. "Mom, please? Can we just—" Margaret raised a manicured hand. All right. Straight to business." She leaned forward, her voice soft but steady. "I only want what's best for you, Ella. You know that." "I know," Ella said quietly. "But the way you're going about it, threatening not to bless our family, it's wrong." Margaret scared. "Blessing, security. Words don't matter. What matters is that you're safe. You can't trust that man to keep his promises." "Men change, dear. Especially when money's involved. Mark isn't like that." "Oh, they all say that at first." Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "Do you think your father was different? He swore on his life that I'd always have our home. Then he died with half our assets tangled in probate court. Do you know how humiliating that was?" Ella's voice softened. "I know, Mom. I know you went through a lot. But Mark's not Dad. He's careful and he's honest." Margaret smiled faintly, like a teacher amused by a naive student. "Sweetheart, honesty doesn't pay for lawyers when the world falls apart." The waiter brought salads, and for a few minutes the only sound was the clink of silverware. Then Margaret leaned forward, eyes glittering. "Let's be practical," she said. "If he won't put the house in your name, he can put it in mine. I'll hold it safely for you both. No one loses?" Ella stared at her. "Mom, that's the same thing you demanded before." Margaret's tone hardened just slightly. "I'm offering a compromise. And you should think carefully before you refuse. Because if I can't trust him, I won't stand by while you bring children into uncertainty. You know how unstable finances destroy families." "Stop it," Ella said sharply, surprising even herself. "You're trying to control me, control us. This isn't about security. It's about you not being able to let go." Margaret blinked, her smile faltering for just a moment before she smoothed it back into place. "You sound just like him," she murmured. "So defensive. So ungrateful for what I've sacrificed." She stood, gathering her purse. "You'll see, Ella. When the day comes that you realize what I was trying to do, I'll still be here." "I always am." Then she left, leaving behind an untouched salad and a daughter torn clean in half. When Ella returned home that evening, she looked exhausted. Mark met her at the door. "She's not changing," Ella whispered. "She thinks she's protecting me, but she's trying to own me." Mark's jaw tightened. "She's using fear to control you, Ella, and she's not going to stop until she gets what she wants." For the first time, Ella didn't argue. She just nodded, eyes full of tired resignation. Mark pulled her close, feeling her trembling against his chest. He knew this wasn't over. Margaret wasn't retreating. She was regrouping. And if she was going to keep playing games, he'd have to learn her rules and then break them entirely. A week later, Mark came home to find Ella sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of baby magazines. The glossy covers, smiling infants, pastel nurseries, and glowing mothers seemed like a cruel joke. The air was heavy, almost too still. He hesitated at the doorway. "Everything okay?" Ella looked up, eyes red-rimmed but dry. "Mom called again?" Of course she had. What did she say this time? And that she's reconsidered. Her voice was fragile, the way glass sounds before it shatters. "She says if we transfer the house into her name before the end of the year, she support us starting a family." Mark exhaled slowly, dragging a hand through his hair. "So now your mother controls our family planning too?" "She says she just wants to make sure her grandchildren have a stable future." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "She doesn't want grandchildren, Ella. She wants property." "You're her excuse." Ella flinched at his tone. "Don't talk about her like that." "Like what?" "Like the manipulative tyrant she's being?" "Mark, no," he snapped. "Enough." I've tried to be polite, to give her space. "But she's not worried, she's obsessed. And she's turning you into the middleman." Ella stood abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor. You think I like this? That I want to be stuck between my husband and my mother every day? Her voice cracked and she pressed a shaking hand to her temple. You don't understand her. She's terrified of losing control. Ever since Dad died, she's been grasping at anything she can hold on to, houses, titles, people. Mark softened slightly. I understand grief, Ella, but there's a line between grief and greed. She's crossing it. Ella turned away, silent. The clock ticked, steady and merciless. Finally, she whispered, she said she won't bless our family if the house isn't secured. And she said if I go ahead without her approval, she cut me off completely. Cut you off? Mark repeated, his anger returning in a sharp, controlled wave. What are you, a child she can ground? You're her daughter, not her property. Ella sank into the chair again, burying her face in her hands. Mark, I want kids. I've wanted them for months. But I can't, not like this. Not with her threatening to disown me. Mark looked at her, at the woman he loved caught between wanting to be a mother and wanting to be a daughter. And in that moment, he understood something painfully clear. Margaret wasn't going to stop until she owned more than just their home. She wanted their choices, their peace, their future. He crouched beside her, gently prying her hands away from her face. Ella, he said quietly, if this house means that much to her, maybe we should let her have it. She blinked through her tears, startled. What? You can't be serious. I'm very serious. His voice was calm now, measured. If this is the game she wants to play, fine. But she doesn't realize what game I'm playing. Mark, what are you talking about? He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the yard, the trimmed hedges. The porch swing they'd built together, the house that held every argument and reconciliation they'd ever had. This house isn't what she thinks it is, he said at last. It's not all I own. Not even close. Ella frowned, confused. What do you mean? I mean, he said, turning back to her, it's time she learned exactly what I own and what she can never have. The tone in his voice sent a chill through her, not of fear, but of realization. Mark wasn't backing down anymore. He wasn't begging for peace or understanding. He was preparing for something deliberate, strategic, final. That night, after Ella went to bed, Mark sat in his study with a notebook, a pen, and his lawyer's number glowing on his phone screen. He didn't write much. Just a single line, if she wants the house, I'll give her one. But not the one she's expecting. He closed the notebook, turned off the light, and for the first time in weeks, slept soundly. Mark had always been meticulous with money. His father, a cautious man who'd built a modest real estate portfolio before he passed, had taught him one rule that stuck like scripture. Never put all your bricks in one house. So while Margaret had been scheming over a single deed, Mark had been quietly diversifying, investing, acquiring, and protecting. He owned properties she didn't even know existed, but he had never needed to mention them before. Until now, the next morning, after Ella left for work, Mark drove downtown to meet his lawyer, David Linton, a calm, sharp-eyed man who'd known the family for years. David greeted him with a raised brow. You sound tense on the phone. Trouble on the home front? You could say that. Mark sat across from him and explained everything: the ultimatum, the property demands, the emotional blackmail. David listened without interrupting, steepling his fingers. When Mark finished, David let out a low whistle. So your mother-in-law wants you to sign over your house, or she cut your wife off from her approval? That's novel. Manipulative is the word, Mark muttered. But I'm not fighting her anymore. I'm giving her what she wants, just not what she expects. David's lips twitched into a half-smile. Go on, Mark leaned forward. She thinks the house we live in is the only property I own. It isn't. The deed's under a family trust, technically not even in my personal name. But there's something else, an old estate my dad left me outright, about 40 miles out of town. David nodded. The one near Brenton Hollow? I remember helping you finalize that. That's the one, Mark said. It's still legally mine. It's worth next to nothing now. Roof's half collapsed. The land's overgrown, but it's still a property. If she wants a house in her name, I'll give her exactly that. David leaned back, considering. Legally, that's airtight. Ethically, Mark interrupted, his voice steady. I'm not doing this out of spite, David. I'm doing it to make a point. She's turning my wife into leverage. I need to show her that greed has consequences. David nodded slowly. Then let's make sure the paperwork's clean. For the next hour, they reviewed the deed, transfer terms, and necessary filings. Everything was by the book, perfectly legal, perfectly traceable, and perfectly poetic. When they finished, David slid the newly drafted transfer across the desk. There, if you hand her this, it'll be official. You'll have given her a house, just like she demanded. Mark took the papers, a slow smile spreading across his face. Good, then she can't say I didn't listen. That evening he returned home to find Ella curled up on the couch, looking small and worn down. How was work? He asked softly. She shrugged. Fine. Mom called again, but I didn't answer. He sat beside her. Good, you shouldn't, at least not yet. Ella looked at him uncertainly. You're planning something, aren't you? Mark hesitated, then nodded. I am. But it's not to hurt her, Ella. It's to end this for good. Her eyes searched his. You're not doing anything illegal, are you? He smiled faintly. Not even close. She leaned into him, tired but trusting. I don't care about the house, Mark. I just want peace. I know, he murmured, brushing a hand through her hair. And you'll have it soon. I promise. But later, when she'd fallen asleep beside him, he stared at the ceiling, replaying his father's words in his head. Never put all your bricks in one house. He built a life with Ella, and he loved her too deeply to let Margaret tear it down. So, if her mother wanted a house so badly, he would give her one complete with cracked windows, rotting floors, and the message she'd forced him to deliver. You wanted my house, Margaret. Now you own it. Mark smiled in the dark, not cruelly, but with the calm certainty of a man who finally knew how to win without fighting. By the following weekend, Mark had everything ready. The paperwork was signed, notarized, and sealed, every line legal, every loophole closed. The house Margaret would soon receive had once been an old countryside estate called Briarwood, now little more than a decaying shell hidden beneath ivy, and to anyone else, it was worthless. To Margaret, it would look like victory until she realized what she'd really won. Mark decided to make the reveal feel like a grand gesture, the kind of theatrical moment Margaret thrived on. He called Ella's mother himself that Thursday evening, keeping his tone deliberately polite. Margaret, it's Mark. I've been thinking about what you said last week, he began, on the other end. A pause, then the sound of satisfaction carefully concealed beneath civility. Oh, I see you've come to your senses. I have, he said smoothly. You were right. Security matters. I've been stubborn and I want to make things right. Why don't you and Ella come over for dinner on Sunday? I'd like to talk about it properly. Dinner? She repeated, cautious but curious. Yes, I'll handle everything. Margaret's tone softened instantly. Well, I suppose we can do that. I'm glad you're finally thinking about your family's future. Mark. Oh, he said lightly, you have no idea. When he hung up, Ella stared at him from the kitchen doorway, suspicion flickering in her eyes. You invited her for dinner? I did, Mark replied, setting his phone down. It's time to end this. End it how? He smiled faintly. With paperwork and dessert. Ella frowned. Mark, please don't make things worse. She'd twist anything you do, not this time. His tone was firm but calm. Trust me, Elle, she's been playing her game long enough. It's my turn now. Sunday arrived crisp and golden, the kind of autumn day that made their little home glow under the fading sun. Mark cooked her favorite meal roast lamb with rosemary potatoes and set the table with care. Ella tried to busy herself helping, but her hands trembled. At precisely 6 o'clock. Margaret's car purred into the driveway, its polished black frame reflecting the sunset. She stepped out wearing pearls and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ella, darling, she cooed, kissing her daughter's cheek. And Mark. Well, I must say, I wasn't expecting such civility. Consider it a new beginning, Mark said, gesturing toward the table. Dinner was calmly so. Margaret complimented the food, commented on the decor, even laughed politely at one of Mark's jokes. But beneath the surface, tension hummed like an electric current. Everyone knew why they were really there. When dessert was cleared, Mark rose quietly, retrieving an envelope from his study. He returned and placed it on the table between them. "What's this?" Margaret asked, eyeing it like a cat watching a mouse. "The deed transfer," Mark said. "You asked for my house. It's done. I've signed everything." Her eyes widened, then softened with satisfaction. "You actually went through with it?" He nodded. "Yes, you'll find the details inside?" She took the envelope with a gleam in her eyes, carefully unsealing it as Ella watched nervously. Mark kept his expression neutral. As Margaret scanned the papers, her lips curled into a smile. "Well, I must admit, I didn't expect you to be this reasonable." Mark met her gaze. "I am to please." She tucked the papers back into the envelope, patting it like a trophy. "You've done the right thing, Mark. You've secured Ella's future." "I'll be sure to keep this safe." "Good," he said softly, a glint in his eyes that she didn't catch. "Because it's officially yours now. Every inch of it." Later that night, after Margaret left with her prize clutched in her handbag, Ella turned to Mark, confused and anxious. "Did you really just give her our home?" He smiled, pouring himself a glass of wine. "Our home?" "No, Ella, she owns a house now. Just not this one." Realization flickered across her face, mingled with disbelief. "Mark, what did you do?" He raised his glass in a quiet toast. "I gave her exactly what she asked for." And as the sound of her mother's car faded down the street, Ella realized she wasn't sure whether to be terrified or impressed. Margaret Whitmore woke up on Monday morning feeling invincible. She had slept better than she had in months, the crisp envelope sitting proudly on her nightstand like a symbol of triumph. Finally, after all her patience, persuasion, and strategy, she had secured her daughter's future. She made herself coffee, humming under her breath, and spent an indulgent half-hour imagining how she'd redecorate her home. Maybe she'd add crown molding, repaint the living room a soft cream, replace that dreadful modern art Mark loved with family portraits. She smiled at the thought of finally being in charge again. At 9 sharp, she decided to drive over. After all, if the house was legally hers now, she had every right to take a little look around. Meanwhile, at home, Mark was already dressed for work when his phone buzzed with a text from Ella. "Mom's coming over, AGAI. What did you do, Mark?" He smiled faintly, tucking his phone back into his pocket. "Perfect timing," he murmured to himself. When Margaret's car rolled into the driveway, she noticed something odd. The curtains were drawn, the porch empty. She rang the bell twice before Mark finally opened the door, cool and composed. "Margaret," he greeted, stepping aside. "Come in." "I just wanted to take another look around," she said, brushing past him. "Get familiar with my new property." He raised an eyebrow but didn't stop her. "Be my guest." She walked through the house with the confidence of a queen inspecting her castle. Her eyes darted to every corner: the fireplace, the kitchen island, the framed wedding photos. "It really is lovely," she said airily. "I'm thinking of turning the guest room into a nursery." Mark's lips twitched. "For your grandchildren?" "Of course," she said smugly. "Now that things are settled, I might even start encouraging Ella again." He watched her for a moment, then said calmly, "About that, there's something you should see." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded letter they received early that morning from the county records office. He handed it to her silently. Margaret frowned, unfolding the document. Her eyes scanned the lines once, twice, then froze. Her face paled. "What is this?" Mark's voice was measured, polite, almost gentle. "It's confirmation of the property transfer you signed for. Briarwood Estate." "Congratulations, you're now the legal owner? Briarwood?" she repeated, confused. "What's Briarwood?" "The house you wanted," Mark said, his tone edged with satisfaction. "It's about 40 miles from here. Beautiful countryside view. Bit of a fixer-upper." Her hands trembled as she flipped through the paperwork. This isn't this house, she hissed. No, he agreed. This house is under the Whitmore Trust. Legally speaking, it's never been mine alone to give away. You tricked me, she snapped. I gave you exactly what you demanded, he said smoothly. You said, give me your house. You never said which one. Margaret's face flushed crimson. You deceitful little— Careful, Mark interrupted, his voice dropping a note lower. Everything was notarized and filed legally. You can check with your lawyer if you like. The deed's yours. The taxes too. She blinked, realizing the weight of his words. The taxes? He smiled. About 4 years' worth of unpaid property taxes, actually. I imagine the county will be thrilled to have someone finally responsible for them. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Margaret stared at him, fury and humiliation warring on her face. You'll regret this, she spat. I doubt it, Mark replied quietly. But you might. He escorted her to the door as she sputtered, shaking with rage. You'll hear from my lawyer, she shouted, slamming her car door. Good, he said under his breath as she sped off. He can explain what you just bought? That night, Ella found him on the back porch, watching the sunset. She called me, she said softly. She's furious. She said you humiliated her. I didn't humiliate her, Mark said calmly. I just gave her a mirror. Ella was silent for a long time. Then, almost reluctantly, a smile tugged at her lips. You really did it, didn't you? He met her gaze. I told you I'd give her exactly what she wanted. And somewhere miles away. Margaret stood in front of the crumbling facade of Briarwood Estate, staring at the peeling paint and broken shutters of her new property, the cold wind cutting through her designer coat, realizing, too late, that she had been outplayed. The news of the Briarwood deed disaster, as Ella later called it, spread through their small town faster than wildfire. It started with a single phone call at 7:30 a.m. on Tuesday. Margaret rang Ella, her voice trembling with outrage. Do you know what your husband's done? She snapped. He's humiliated me. That filthy old farmhouse he tricked me into accepting, it's practically falling apart. Ella pinched the bridge of her nose, trying to keep calm. Mom, he didn't trick you. You demanded a house. He gave you one. You're defending him? Margaret's voice cracked like glass. You're choosing him over your own mother? Ella closed her eyes. No, Mom, I'm choosing peace. And you've made that impossible for months. There was silence on the line. Then in a voice colder than steel, Margaret said, If you hang up this phone, Ella, don't expect to hear from me again. And for the first time in her life, Ella whispered, Goodbye. Mom? Then she hung up. Mark found her an hour later sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone. She means it this time, Ella murmured. She won't forgive us. Mark sat beside her, his tone gentle. Maybe not now, but that's not on you anymore. I didn't think she'd ever hate me, Ella said softly. He wrapped an arm around her. She doesn't hate you. She hates losing control. It's not the same thing. For the first time since the whole ordeal began, Ella didn't argue. She just leaned against him, her tears quiet and tired, the kind that come when you've run out of words. Meanwhile, Margaret's fury ripened into obsession. She drove out to Briarwood again, this time dragging along a reluctant real estate agent. The man stepped out of his car, took one look at the rotting porch and sagging roof, and said, Ma'am, this property's condemned. Margaret's jaw tightened. Nonsense. It just needs a little work. He eyed the broken windows. A little work? Ma'am, this house is a liability. You'd spend more repairing it than it's worth. She turned away, clutching her coat tighter as the wind swept through the overgrown field. The estate's once grand iron gate creaked behind her, a bitter echo of the wealth and respect she'd tried so desperately to reclaim. When she returned home that afternoon, she called her lawyer, demanding to reverse the transfer. But every conversation ended the same way. It's legal, Mrs. Whitmore. But he deceived me. He fulfilled your written request. You signed voluntarily. He tricked me into owning a worthless ruin. Then perhaps next time, ma'am, read the fine print. The final insult came a week later. in the form of a letter from the county tax office, payment due for 4 years of back taxes on Briarwood estate. Margaret's screams could be heard down the street. For Mark and Ella, the silence that followed was strange, peaceful, but empty. No more calls, no more visits, no more emotional landmines hidden in polite conversation. Ella found herself missing her mother's voice some nights, but she also slept better than she had in years. She began painting again, something she'd stopped doing under her mother's constant scrutiny. Mark noticed the change, how she smiled more easily, how her shoulders no longer tensed when her phone buzzed. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ella said quietly, "You know, part of me feels guilty." "Why?" Mark asked. "Because I didn't stop her sooner. I kept trying to fix her." "But maybe some people don't want to be fixed, they just want to win." Mark nodded. "Then it's good you finally stopped playing her game." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You think she ever talked to me again?" He hesitated, then said honestly, "Maybe, but only when she realizes what she lost." The breeze stirred, carrying the faint scent of lavender from the garden. For the first time in months, the air felt light and burdened, and somewhere miles away, in a cold, crumbling mansion that now legally bore her name, Margaret Whitmore sat surrounded by silence, clutching a deed that no longer meant victory, only defeat. The days that followed were quiet, eerily so. For the first time in years, there were no surprise visits, no meddling phone calls, no passive-aggressive comments about family duty. Mark and Ella woke to silence, ate breakfast without tension, and began rediscovering what it meant to just be together, but even in peace. There was a strange ache that lingered. One morning, Ella stood by the window, cradling her coffee mug as sunlight spilled through the glass. "It's odd," she said softly. "I used to dread hearing her voice. Now I almost miss it." Mark looked up from the paper. "Almost?" She smiled faintly. "Almost. I miss who I wanted her to be, not who she was." He nodded, understanding. They both knew grief had many faces, and one of them was realizing that someone you loved was never going to change. Weeks turned into months. Ella found new energy in her art. Her easel returned to the corner of the living room, and soon bright colors filled the house again, shades of gold, ocean blue, and soft lavender. Mark often came home to find her barefoot on the floor, lost in color and light, her laughter echoing faintly through the halls. It was as if she was painting her way out of the shadow her mother had cast for so long. Sometimes she'd paint late into the night while Mark worked beside her on his laptop. They didn't speak much during those hours. They didn't need to. Peace had its own language, spoken in the quiet hum of brushes and shared glances, but the world outside hadn't forgotten what happened. Margaret's deed scandal had become local gossip. Her once adoring social circle whispered behind her back. Invitations to her luncheons dried up. People smiled politely but avoided eye contact when she passed through the market, her reputation built on control. Wealth and appearances had cracked wide open. She tried to rebuild her image, of course. Donated to charities, hosted teas, gave thinly veiled speeches about forgiveness. But everyone in town knew the story. They'd heard how she'd demanded her son-in-law's home, only to end up the sole owner of a rotting estate and a mountain of back taxes. And for the first time, Margaret found herself alone in rooms she once commanded. One evening, Ella received a short letter in the mail. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, elegant, familiar. "Ella, I hope you're well. I've been reflecting lately. Perhaps I pushed too hard. I believed I was protecting you, but maybe I was just protecting my pride. The Briarwood property has been sold. I've cleared my debts. That chapter is closed. Take care of yourself." Mother Ella read it 3 times. There was no apology, not really, but it was something. A soft tremor of humanity in a woman who'd built her whole life on pride. She folded the letter carefully and set it in the drawer beside her bed. When Mark came home that night, she didn't tell him right away. She waited until they were sitting on the porch, the sky painted in streaks of rose and violet. "She wrote to me," Ella said finally. He turned to her. "And?" She's not angry anymore, just tired, I think. Mark nodded, his voice gentle. Then maybe you both can rest now. Ella smiled faintly. Maybe we already are. That night, as she fell asleep, Ella dreamt of an open field bathed in sunlight, no houses, no walls, no names on deeds. Just freedom, and when she woke, she knew something had changed. The bitterness was gone. The fear had faded. In its place was quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need revenge or validation. For the first time in her life, Ella Whitmore didn't belong to her mother's world. She belonged to her own. Spring arrived softly that year. The air smelled of new beginnings, fresh rain, turned soil. Blooming jasmine that crept along the garden fence. Mark and Ella sat side by side on the porch steps, the morning sun catching in Ella's hair as she absently traced circles on her coffee mug. You've been quiet lately, Mark said. She smiled faintly. I've been thinking, dangerous habit. She nudged him playfully. About us. About what comes next? He raised an eyebrow. Next? I think I'm ready, she said, her voice almost shy. To start a family. For real this time. Mark blinked, setting down his cup. For a moment, he thought he'd misheard her. You mean? She nodded, eyes bright but steady. No more waiting for anyone's approval. No more strings attached. He laughed softly, pulling her close. You have no idea how long I've wanted to hear that. That afternoon, they drove out to the edge of town where Mark had been quietly working on a surprise for months. He parked the car in front of a wide, open plot of land bordered by willow trees and wildflowers. Ella stepped out, puzzled. Where are we? Mark handed her a folder. Ours, he said simply. Inside were blueprints, elegant, detailed, full of warmth. A new home. Their home. I started the paperwork after. Everything, he said. Didn't want to say anything until I was sure. She stared at the plans, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. It's beautiful, Mark, but why here? He smiled. Because it's far from the noise. Because it's not about what we own, it's about what we build. She looked up at him, her voice breaking. You really never gave up on us, did you? Not for a second. They stood there for a long while, the breeze tugging at her hair, the sound of birds echoing through the open field. Months passed. Foundations were poured, walls rose, laughter returned. Ella painted the nursery a soft mint green, her brushstrokes confident and sure. Mark built the crib himself, imperfect but full of love, every weekend. They'd drive out to check on the progress, hand in hand, already imagining a life filled with bedtime stories and backyard picnics. And when their son was finally born that winter, Ella held him close and whispered, You're home now. Little one? Mark looked at them both, his chest tight with emotion. You know, he said softly, your mother might come around one day. Want to see him? Ella nodded, her expression calm. Maybe she will? But I'm not building my peace on her terms anymore. A few months later, a letter arrived, handwritten, formal, and brief. It was from Margaret. Ella, congratulations on your son. I hope he brings you the happiness you deserve. I am glad you're building something of your own. Enclosed is a check for his college fund. Consider it my way of making amends. Mother Ella smiled faintly when she read it. Not because of the money, but because for the first time, her mother hadn't asked for anything in return. She tucked the letter away, kissed her son's forehead, and went out to the porch where Mark was watching the sunset. She wrote again, Ella said. He turned to her. Good news? Better than that, she said softly. Closure? As the sky burned gold and crimson, Mark took her hand. Their baby asleep in her arms. You know, he murmured. I think this is what real inheritance looks like. Ella smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. Not houses, not deeds, just love that lasts. And as the evening light faded, their laughter drifted through the open airsoft, content, and entirely their own. The house they were building wasn't just made of wood and walls. It was built on freedom, forgiveness, and a promise that no one would ever demand their peace again.